So we are going to record this session. The best of our presentations gets put up on the website. So it's our opportunity for it to be the best. If you're uncomfortable being on camera, you're always welcome to turn your video off with the little start-stop video thing there. There's also, you've come into this presentation muted. We're going to ask you to stay muted for the bulk of the presentation until the end, just because it makes it harder for other folks to hear, harder for the recording to work. If you are joining us by phone and you needed to unmute yourself, that would be *6. As I said, Lily will be helping out in the chat there with questions. Karen and I tend to answer questions, whichever one of us is talking at the time. If you do get disconnected, you'll return through a waiting room. And Lily's monitoring that, so you won't be stuck there for too long. That's like a security thing for us. And if you would like, you can turn on closed caption in Zoom. It's one of the options along the bottom. And when we post the recording, that closed caption will also be available. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Monarch Community Science, the project, why we do it, the sort of state of monarch conservation right now in the United States and other places. Karen's going to do the important discussion about how to record your data for this project, the platform we use for data, and then I'll end with a little chat about how to look for eggs and caterpillars. We'll do more of that polling. We'll look at some caterpillar identifications, some milkweed identifications. And like I said, I think we will be out of here a little before 8 o'clock with plenty of time for questions. So I don't think we need to rush, but I think we'll get you out of here before it's too late. So before we dive in, I want to start a place that we often start with Field Museum presentations and acknowledge that the Field Museum resides in the traditional homelands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, and that this area was used as a site of trade and gathering and healing for more than a dozen other Native tribes. Nearly 500,000 tribal members currently make their home in the 6 states of the Upper Midwest. We recognize that Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the land that we now occupy, living here long before Chicago was a city and still thriving here today. Monarchs are a species that traverse indigenous lands across North America. The Purepecha people in Michoacan, Mexico, where the monarchs overwinter, track the butterfly's fall arrival, calling them paracata, or harvester butterfly, because the return signaled that it was time to harvest the corn. Deep cultural traditions connect Indigenous peoples to this species and their land. Indigenous people across North America play a vital role in conservation of this species. And I think it is good to begin by thinking about how the monarchs move across a huge landscape, bigger than what we'll discuss here in Chicago, and they really make a continental migration. So what's our goal? We'll talk about, this is the 4th year of our project, and so a few people are joining us from previous years, some people are joining us for the first time. And as we launch into a long discussion of how we do this project, I like to start with why. You know, our goal is always, and always has been, to understand what is a successful urban milkweed garden, first from the perspective of monarchs, but also that people are willing to have in their yard, because we're not going to plant monoculture milkweed across every yard in Chicago, nor would we want to. So what gardens attract a lot of eggs and have those eggs move into caterpillars and bigger caterpillars, and then hopefully into chrysalises? That's our goal, is to try to understand those traits. And so as we go through this process and ask the questions, that's what we're always returning to. This is year 4 of the project. If anybody has joined us for a past year, thank you so much. Welcome back. Anyone here for the first time, which I think is most folks, thank you for joining us. Thanks for thinking about this project. It's something that over the last 4 years, we poured a lot of thought into. It's been made better every year by the feedback and thoughts of participants that have come before you. Folks that did it in 2019, it was quite different from it is now. And I think we've really gotten our legs under us now, and the project is moving quite well. We've had 354 participants in the last 3 years. And our secret goal that I'm telling you right now is to get to 500 this year. I don't know if we'll get quite there, but that's my hope. It will be really exciting. And those folks have monitored 372 sites, and that represents over almost 700 patches. And those are big numbers, which is important, but what it tells me is also it's way more data than Karen and Lily and I could have ever collected. For an individual to collect this kind of data from people's yards, it's very labor intensive. Obviously, we have to get permission. We're not allowed to just roam through people's yards. Just that permission process and tracking that is really labor intensive. We've tried it. And so this is really the kind of data that can only be collected through a community science project because we just wouldn't have the reach, the capacity to do it. And folks have counted over 18,000 eggs and 3,000 caterpillars, which, in addition to showing how much data we've collected, really shows the power of people's yards to create and protect habitat for the monarch butterfly. So this will just be a little story about the monarch migration. So sometimes when people come to hear about the monarch, this is like the one thing that they know. I know when I started, I was a little fuzzy on all the steps. So we're going to start in Michoacan in the winter, where the monarch was back in February. And as temperature starts to warm up in central Mexico, monarchs move north into northern Mexico, Texas, and that generation lays eggs and dies. And then another generation of monarchs is born, and they're arriving here in Chicago. And they will live and breed and die, and another generation, until late August, early September, when a generation of monarchs is born that's just a little bit bigger than the previous generations, and they're going to live quite a bit longer. And they're going to migrate from the Chicago area or even up into southern Canada, all the way down to Michoacan, Mexico, live through the winter, and then begin that journey north. And there'll be multiple generations removed. The butterfly that makes that migration is multiple generations from the butterfly that made the migration before, which is pretty wild that they can do that. And this is the eastern population of monarch butterflies that we're going to talk about. There is a population that lives west of the Rockies called the western population. We're not really going to talk about them. Their migration is a little bit different. And so our butterflies are the eastern population of monarchs, and they're the ones that make that kind of iconic migration. And I want to say a little bit about where they go in Mexico before we move on, because we're going to talk a lot about what we do here for monarch butterflies and conservation that happens in the Midwest and how important it is. And it is very important. But one thing that is significant about migratory species is every step of the migration is important. And so the overwintering grounds, you can see here, these sort of piney looking trees are called Omael trees. The monarchs roost on them, and this is like the rust covering stuff, it's like butterflies is covering the trees, like dripping from the trees. And in the winter, the area of those concentrations of butterflies is monitored by both professional staff and volunteers. And I'll be showing you the results of that momentarily. The Monarch Sanctuary is a tourist attraction, and that tourism revenue suffered during COVID. It's supported by a trust that has money both from within Mexico and external outside funders. And it's a really important part of the monarch conservation. And it is a place that has not escaped all of the violence that happens in Mexico, in this region of Mexico around narco trafficking. Employees of the Monarch Sanctuary have been murdered along with journalists just this year in the area. And so it's a place where conservation is really serious, and really contentious. And so we're every year thankful for what happens in Mexico. And this is the result of that monitoring. It's measured in hectares of butterflies, which is a little weird, but they can never count them all. You measure the area, hectares. We're used to acres here. So right here's this blue line at 6 hectares, which is about 17 acres, is what good science tells us is the average that we need to maintain in order to sustain the population. And you can see pretty clearly that it's been a long time, over a decade, since we've averaged that. We had one good year back in 2018, 2019, but for the most part, we've fallen well below it, averaging a little below 3 hectares. Actually, just this week, we received the overwintering numbers from this past winter, which is a little later than normal. And while we see a modest improvement over last year, it's not nearly averaging that 6 hectares that we need to. And that's the other thing people tend to know about monarchs is they migrate and that the population is in trouble. And that's true. Certainly what originally brought us to monarch work was after there was a petition filed in 2014 to list the monarch as an endangered species. The branch of our government that deals with that is called the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And when there's a petition to list a species, there's a very strict legal process that they have to follow. And they have to do really good science, which they did. And that they came up with that we need to maintain that 6-hectare average. And that in order to do that, we need to add 1.8 billion stems of milkweed to the landscape, largely in the Midwest. Billion with a B is a big number. It's a lot of milkweed that we needed to add to the landscape. We came in at that point to think about how much of that milkweed could be added in cities. And, you know, unfortunately, we haven't succeeded in stabilizing the population since 2015 or 2014. In 2020, the Fish and Wildlife Service was required to make a decision on whether or not the species would be listed. And what they did, and it's a science-based decision, was determine that, you know, there's reason and cause to list the monarch as an endangered species. But they said it was precluded because there are other higher priority species that have been waiting longer to be listed. So they will reevaluate that decision in 2024, which in 2020 seemed like forever away, and now seems like it's right around the corner. So, you know, we're waiting for that decision, but we're not waiting without inaction. Everything that we do is in the knowledge that the species is in trouble, they're struggling, and that the thing that we can do here in the Midwest is add milkweed to the landscape and other flowers. And so why milkweed? I've been talking about milkweed like it's the most important thing. And that's because monarch caterpillars have like what's called a host plant relationship with milkweed. Female monarchs will only lay eggs on milkweed plants, and the caterpillars will only eat milkweed, which is plants in the genus Asclepias, which is hard to say. But adult monarch butterflies, so after they're done being caterpillars, they go through their metamorphosis, like the hungry caterpillar, and then they drink nectar from flowers. So you could have a field of nothing but milkweed wall to wall and not sustain the monarch butterfly because you wouldn't have flowers blooming throughout the season for the adults. Or you could have the most beautiful, diverse, amazing prairie, but if it didn't contain milkweed, you wouldn't be able to sustain the monarch butterfly because there wouldn't be anything for the caterpillars to eat. And that's another thing I like about insects and migratory species is that they require a diversity of habitat. They require us to think about, you know, this entire continent, and that excites me. And so that's why I like monarchs. So this is, you know, we looked at, particularly in cities, where is there space to add milkweed? And two places that you would expect are what we called open space conservation land, like forest preserves, open space. It's not exactly conservation focused, but like the park districts. There's space there to add milkweed, and those folks are doing a lot. And then there's rights of way along roadways, you know, area along the highway where most people saw milkweed for the first time, maybe, or the area under power lines. You don't think about if you add all that up, it's a narrow, but a lot of habitat under all those things. And so road, you know, Department of Transportation, ComEd, folks like that are really thinking a lot about the places where they can add milkweed in those utility corridors. But the real opportunity area with the box around it and the arrow pointing to it, because that's what I wanted us to focus on, is residential. And that's both surprising and not. You know, you oh, people's yards, really? But you know, turf grass is the largest irrigated crop in North America, or in the United States. I will not speak to North America. Largest irrigated crop in the United States. And so yards are a lot of space, and it's really typically good milkweed habitat. So it's hard because the park district can just decide to convert 5 acres, and you know they have to go through their own internal process, but they own that land. And I'm not allowed to choose what people put in their yards, which is more the pity. But in order to get habitat into people's yards, that's a decision that people have to decide to plant the milkweed and decide to maintain the milkweed. And that's part of what brings us to this project, because you, our community scientists, are asking you both to plant and maintain milkweed, and then to do a little bit more and tell us what's happening on that milkweed. And some people like the term citizen science. We like the term community science, both because certainly no one needs to be a citizen to do it, but also that we hope that this is building a community, us, of folks that are interested in doing this and caring for the monarch, but also that it becomes part of what happens in the community. People who do this project get excited about engaging their neighbors, engaging their municipalities and villages, and doing more for the monarch. And that's what is really needed. It's more than any one person could do. It is a community effort to care for a species like this. And so what do you need to do now that I've told you it's a very vitally important project? What do you need to do? And what do you need in order to do it? So you need at least one milkweed plant, because you got to attract those monarch eggs. And stay tuned. We'll tell you about some milkweed plant giveaways that we have coming. We think that the project takes about 30 minutes a week, and that's going to depend. If you have one plant, it'll be a little less than that. If you have 100 plants, we thank you, and it will take you longer than 30 minutes to monitor all those plants. So we have some strategies coming up on how you can, if you have a lot of plants, how you can kind of mitigate how much work you're having to do there. Our data recording does happen online, because you are seeing the entire Monarch team. There is not another person who could help. So we need you to enter your data into a portal, because we can't enter it, and that is online. And Karen will go into detail about how to do that. And once in July, we'll ask you to measure how big your garden is, and so you'll need some sort of measuring tape for that. At this point in the year, when your milkweeds are small, it can be helpful to have like those flags the utility company uses, or like ropes or ribbons or things, just to kind of break up your space and make things easier to find. And we can talk about that strategy. So I also want to tell you that the data that gets submitted for this project is, at the end of the season, Karen uploads it to the National Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And this community science project has been going on since 1997. It's run now out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Arboretum. And the reason this is good news is it means that your data feeds into a national database. As Fish and Wildlife is making their decisions about the monarch, they have access to this national database. Other researchers throughout the country have access to this national database. It means that if we did not do a good job of following through and producing anything from this work, that there are other people that would use it. And it, we think, represents really good community science practice to know that your data doesn't stop with us. It is used by as many people as possible and appreciated. And we keep your location sort of private. So what is you're going to be asked to do? Karen's going to go through this in detail, but just in summary, once at the beginning of the season, now you answer questions about the site, the greater area, like the place with the address where this project is happening. And then from June through September, you monitor weekly, counting how many eggs and caterpillars are on your plants. And then once in July, you make that measurement. So there's a consistent effort that we ask for, but hopefully not a large amount of effort at any given time. And of course, we understand that people travel, and if you miss a week while traveling, that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to go through a few of the little tricky parts of the protocol, and one of those is we had to come up with terms for things, and so these are our little words that we use. So the site is the bigger area. So typically this is like a home in its yard, the thing that would have an address. But this could also be, you know, a park, or you know, if it's at your workplace or a church. Sort of, if you were to give it an address in Google Maps, that's the larger site, and that's where you're going to tell us about other things that are around where the milkweed plants are. And then within your site, you could have more than one patch of milkweed. For example, there are 3 patches, or 2, depending on how you do the math, on this drawing. And we did that so that you could monitor the milkweed in your backyard, but not your front yard if you didn't want to. Or you could monitor the milkweed in your side yard, but not the milkweed in your backyard. And that just lets you moderate how much effort you're putting in. If you don't want to, if you have a whole bunch of plants, you don't want to monitor them all. It lets you, if you have one patch that is very different than another, to distinguish for us those differences. And so You do not need to monitor all the milkweed in your garden if you can break it up into different patches like this. We generally say patches are groups of milkweed separated by non-natural habitat. Either side of your driveway is a common example, front yard or backyard with a large expanse of turf grass in between them. You know, you have to think about, like, would a caterpillar traverse from one group of milkweed to another? And generally they stay on milkweed. So they'll move from milkweed plant to milkweed plant, but they won't cross a large expanse to get away or go find something else, because that milkweed is what they're eating until they reach that largest stage when they go off to make the chrysalis, and then they do go on a little walkabout. But that's sites versus patches. Some people have found that a little confusing. We actually have a copy of this slide on our website if you're ever confused. Another reason that people break their yard into patches is if they would like a patch of milkweed from which to collect eggs and caterpillars to raise. This can be something that's really fun to do for yourself, for young people in your life. It's pretty cool to see them, you know, move through all their stages. Unfortunately for our project, because we're determining how many eggs go from one stage, from egg to first instar or first stage caterpillar, second, third, fourth, if eggs and caterpillars are disappearing, it either confuses our data or we think more of them are being eaten or dying. So if you are going to raise them, please do them from a patch that is not part of our project. We suggest following the guidelines that the Monarch joint venture gives to do it in a way that's healthiest for the caterpillar, and it's going to give you the best success rate. There is some evidence that doing them in pop-up mesh enclosures like this, especially later in the season, is good for the butterflies to get exposed to that length of day, because that might help them know to migrate. And that is everything. It's called head starting, hand rearing, different names people use for them. So weekly, when you go to monitor, if you have more than one species of milkweed in the patch, you're gonna monitor by species. So we want to know, like, I have 5 common milkweed plants and there were 3 eggs in my common milkweed. I have 2 butterfly milkweeds and there were no eggs in my butterfly milkweeds. And so it's usually easiest to count the milkweeds by species for that reason. Time of day doesn't matter. You can do it whenever it's most comfortable for you. It can be helpful if your patch is bigger to divide it up with, like, ropes. So it's like, okay, I'm monitoring between these 2 and then I'm going to move them. It helps you not double count. If you only have 5 plants, you don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. I don't have that many milkweed, but that can be helpful in either bigger patches. As I said, you can use those utility flags to mark plants, or some people just use like a plastic fork or knife, especially now where they can be hard to find. One thing that we had to do was designate what is a plant, which sounds really goofy, but this data goes into a national database, and milkweed looks really different, especially out west. And so we know that sometimes underground milkweed plants can be connected, and you have one plant, but it's actually really a clone of the plant over there. That may not be true for how things are happening in other parts of the country. So what we had to decide is that when the milkweed plant breaks the surface of the soil and makes a stalk with some leaves on it, maybe a flower later in the season, that is one plant. Even if right over here next to it is another stalk breaking the surface, and you think, well, underground, that's really just an offshoot of that. If there's soil between them, we call them 2 separate plants. If a stalk comes up and there's a bunch of branching off of it and it almost forms like a little shrub, it's still one plant, even if there's more leaves on it than the other plant, because in the data, we kind of know what species are most likely to do that. So I'm going to try to have some examples here, and this can be a little hard to see, but so this is a bunch of, this is like 4, 5, 6 swamp milkweeds, all growing really closely together in this pod, and we would call these 6 different plants. Similarly over here, now these are butterfly milkweeds, and you'd have to sweep that bark mulch away because bark mulch doesn't count. But when these stalks are breaking the ground, there's dirt between them, we're going to call them different plants. Even though this is almost certainly one plant putting up different shoots, that's just how we count it for the project. So here I tried to take a photo. It's always hard to take a photo of this case. And butterfly milkweed will do this sometimes. I think this is one stalk that has put up branches, almost a little like a little shrub. And we would still count this as one plant, even if it's forming like a little shrub type structure. So if you have any questions, feel free to take a picture and shoot us an email, and also just do your best. This is your number of plants in your garden is going to change throughout the season, and this is part of just tracking that change. So we have a data sheet that Karen's going to show you how we record our data through an online portal. We also have a data sheet that you can print and use when you're outside, so people find that helpful. I included a photo of it here because it shows you a couple things we like to capture when you start monitoring, when you end monitoring, because we do like to know how much time we're asking you for. What I've done, I have 2 species of milkweed in this patch, and I've written down the number of plants and the number of eggs and instar or stages of caterpillar on each plant. When I'm out in the field, I often create little tick marks, and then I'm like, okay, I ended up seeing 7, and then I turn that into a whole number when I enter it. The back side of the data sheet shows you some data, and Karen will go through this, but this is optional data. If you have time and you want to, we love it when people record the other plants that are in bloom in their patch. This can be helpful for us in understanding if having other blooming plants attracts or detracts monarchs from coming to a patch. And it's been helpful for me to do it just to know, wow, I actually do have a period in June where I don't have anything blooming, because my golden Alexander hasn't started blooming yet, but all my really early season stuff is done. Well, maybe I want to think about adding something that blooms during that period. And then we also track other, insects and spiders that you see in your garden. Some of these are adult monarchs themselves, or no, those are on the other page. But some are other butterflies that you might see, but some of these are also pests that feed on both monarch eggs or on milkweed itself. And it's not necessarily a problem when people have those, but it's interesting to know what folks are seeing. And we find that, once you're going there every week, you start seeing new things each week. It's pretty fun. So with that, we're going to transition to Karen talking about how to record your data. I was going to say I could take a couple questions that people have asked about. Somebody asked about transplanting milkweed from their neighbor's yard, and depends a little bit which species of milkweed it is, but generally as soon as you can in the season. So I would do it like now, especially while it's still cool. You want to dig as deep as you can to get as much of that taproot as you can. You're not going to get all of it. And plant it and water it really well. It's not unsuccessful, but it's not 100% success. Some places will say you can't transplant it, and that's not true. A bunch of us first got milkweed by taking it all out of the same person's yard. When you couldn't really buy milkweed, but I would not expect 100% success. So somebody is asking, and we get this question a lot, how much should we interfere with aphid infestation? So aphids are tiny little buggies that you can just see on this mint plant that I have right here, maybe little spots. And they, I just killed one. They have lamel part, and they actually feed off of the juices, the life force of the plant. A lot of times they're not a big deal, and in fact, we're going to talk about getting free milkweed from us, and will almost certainly come with a free aphid infestation, courtesy of the fact that we don't spray pesticides on our plants. When you're buying nursery plants, if you're not buying organic ones, a lot of times they have been treated with a pesticide because people don't like the look of aphids. They can be a little creepy. So for our project, we like it. We want, not everyone is going to take care of the aphids on their plants. So as much having the wilds of nature, being exposed to the wilds of nature, but a lot of people do shake aphids off into a little canister of soapy water. As somebody is alluding to, they have natural predators in the form of ladybugs, lady beetles, although that is not always successful. Last year was a particularly rough year because it was so dry. Oftentimes, especially established plants, don't really suffer much from an aphid infestation. Sometimes you will see a plant just completely covered and the aphids have won. Last year was particularly hard. So I think hopefully our wetter season, things are going to go a little bit better this year. But yeah, if you want to shake those aphids off into a soapy water container, totally get that. With that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn the reins over to Karen to hear about data collection.
Thank you, Erica. Now I'm going to talk about how you're going to record your data. And first, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about our website, which can be found at bit.ly/Monarch Monitors, and we'll put that in the chat for you. And that is where you're going to find everything you need to know to participate in this project. And that includes a page with a brief summary about why we are doing this project. And this is also where you will create your community account, which many of you have already done when you registered for this training session. And that is also really important because you need to be logged in when you're inputting your data into our online surveys. This helps us keep track of who entered what data without having to ask you over and over again who you are. There's also a page where you can register for additional trainings. We've just added one more training scheduled in June. So if you feel like you need to hear from us again, or you want to share this with your neighbors or your friends, we encourage you to register and share this registration with them. From our website, you can also access the first survey where you will tell us about your site and patches that you will be monitoring. And I'll show you that in a moment. We also have a page dedicated to project resources, such as the data sheet that Erica just showed you, as well as other training documents and videos from our previous trainings. We also have a page where you can see results live as surveys are submitted this year, as well as see a summary of our results from the last 3 years. And we also have some links to some interactive dashboards where you can explore the data in more detail. Finally, we have an FAQ page where you can get answers to commonly asked questions. So if you haven't already, please make sure to create a community account. And you can do that by clicking on the star found on the left-hand side of the website, or on clicking on the sign up button found on the top of the homepage. And you can create an account with your GitHub, Facebook, Gmail, Apple ID, or at the bottom, you can click create a Hub community account to create an account with any email address, as you can see on the right-hand side. And I've circled some of the most common options for you. You can log into the website platform by clicking on the sign in button found on the top right of the site. So now that you're ready to get started, the first step is to fill out the site and patches survey, which you only need to complete one time per address that you are monitoring. And that's where you're going to tell us about the site as well as the patches of milkweed that you're going to monitor. So even if you have participated in a previous year, we ask that you again complete this survey so we have your latest information. Once you submit the survey, you'll receive an email with a summary of your site and patches. That will look something like this. It contains a description of your site as well as each patch that you listed. And for each patch that you included, you'll get a unique link for you to use to submit your first weekly monitoring. So if you are monitoring 2 patches, you'll record them separately using the 2 links that will be provided for you. When you click that link, you will be taken to your weekly patch survey to record your monitoring observations for that week. This link will automatically fill in information about the patch name, milkweed species, and plant count from your site survey. If any of these change at any point, you can update it as you fill it out the survey. Once you submit the weekly survey, you'll receive a new email with a summary of your monitoring, and that includes the survey date in the subject line. This email will contain a link to edit the survey you just submitted if you find that there were any mistakes, and you can also view all of the weekly data that you've previously collected. Finally, this email will contain a new link for you to use for the following week's survey of that patch. This link will be updated if there were any changes to your milkweed species or plant count. If you do happen to use an older link, just make sure that these fields are accurate. Also, 6 days after your monitoring date, you're going to receive a reminder email with that same link to submit your next survey. So if you lose one email, just be on the lookout for your reminder email. And remember that you'll submit this weekly survey every week for each patch and get both a summary email and a reminder email every week with the link for the following week's survey. Erica showed you what it looks like to record your data on the data sheet, and I'll show you where you can find that on our website. But please note that while you can optionally record your observations on paper, you do have to record it using the online surveys. That is the only way we can get your data. Also, we prefer that you submit your data weekly so you can get a summary of your observations and a reminder to monitor every week. Also, we want your zeros. Even if you didn't see any eggs or caterpillars on your milkweed, please still go in and enter your weekly data. This helps us understand what makes a successful patch, knowing when eggs and caterpillars are seen versus when they aren't seen. And this is also an opportunity for you to tell us about the other things that you're seeing in your garden, such as the other pollinators and insects, along with the plants that are blooming. So now I will give a live demonstration and show you our website. So this is our website. Again, you can get to it by going to bit.ly/monarchmonitors, which we'll have in the chat. I'll return to this homepage in a moment, but first I'll show you a few of the other pages which can be accessed from this top row. The second page on our website is the About page, which, as I mentioned, will tell you a little bit more about our project and the goal of this project. We then have two resources page. One of them is in Spanish, and it has all of our training documents and videos in Spanish. And you have the option of translating both of the surveys into Spanish if you prefer. You can also translate the entire website into any other language by clicking on this button found on the left-hand side and selecting your desired language. And that option is through Google Translate. So let's go take a look at our other training resources page in English. And we can see that we have a calendar of our upcoming training events. Currently has today's and the next one, which you can select and register for if you would like. We also have resource documents that you can download, including a guide to defining your site, the data sheet, a caterpillar stage guide, as well as a guide to identifying the milkweed. You can click on any of these images to open it up, and it will allow you to download it. We have also just recently added 2 new field guides that we have for creating monarch habitat, as well as a guide to identifying some insects and spiders that you might see in your Midwestern garden. And some of the pictures from this guide were actually provided from past participants. We can also see videos from our previous trainings. Currently, this has last year's trainings, but we will be updating it with recordings from this year's trainings. We also have a results page. This is where we can see the results live as surveys are submitted. So we can see currently 29 sites have been submitted this year, and people have gone out 15 times to do their weekly monitoring. And so far, 4 eggs have been observed. We also have a map where we can see people's sites. So when you fill out that site survey, you're going to tell us where your site is located. And optionally, you can provide us with a label that will appear as a pop-up. We can see here at the beehive. And this will also appear when I zoom in. Please note that when I zoom in to a certain extent, these locations will disappear so that we're not sharing your specific home address. We want to protect your privacy. But this is a great way to look at where the sites are located in your neighborhood, as well as the whole Chicagoland region. As you scroll down, you can also see a summary of our results from the last 3 years. While we're still in the process of analyzing our data, we have shared some of our preliminary findings. And here you can read more about the characteristics of patches that tended to have higher numbers of monarch eggs and caterpillars. You can see what we've learned about different species of milkweed and how they support eggs and caterpillars, as well as learn about when we see monarchs in our area. So you can use these links to jump to one of those sections. So as Erica said, the patch characteristics is one of our main areas of interest. So you can read about what we've learned about where they are found. And you can also click on these dashboard links if you're interested in exploring the data a little bit in more detail. And this will allow you to zoom in. You can filter the patches using the guide on the left-hand side. And you can see where patches were that had at least 1 egg, et cetera, and look at how that affected the size, the number of plants and species of plants. But typically we can see that the patches that were most successful tended to be older and more established, be larger in size, often had a lot more milkweed and multiple species of milkweed, and were generally surrounded by a diversity of other blooming plants. But we do like to say that even the smallest bit matters. We have actually seen a participant submit photos of a potted plant that supported a monarch all the way from caterpillar to chrysalis to adult. So we encourage people with patches of all sizes to participate. So as I scroll down, you can read a little bit more about what we've learned about milkweed species, as well as our monthly results. And at the very bottom, you can see these images will take you to photo albums. And these are photos that were taken by our participants in the last 2 years. And we'll be updating them with this year's photos. And this is a great way to get some help with identifying if you want to look at some more photos of monarch eggs, as well as the different caterpillars, and even look at some of the other insects and spiders that people saw on their patches. So now we're going to return back to the homepage by clicking on Monarch Community Science. And as we scroll down, we can see a little bit more about this project. We can see the steps for participating in the project. So the first step was joining our community, which you've done by either clicking on the email list or by creating your account. You've also, congratulations, attended a training. So the next step is to tell us about your site using the site survey. And you can click on the button here, as well as use the button here. And then the last step will be to do that weekly monitoring. So let's go ahead and click on the link. If you're not logged in, when you click on it, it will prompt you to log in with that community account that you've created. So I'm going to go with you in real time and enter the data. So first, we're going to ask for your name as well as your email address. And please make sure to use an email address that is one that you regularly check and make sure it's accurate. This is where all of those emails that you'll get from the surveys will go to. So we encourage you to use one that is correct. The next step is to provide the location that is used on the map that we saw. And I encourage you, as you type in your address, you're going to see that you're going to have some options pop up. So I'm currently typing in the address for the Field Museum. Please select the address that is appropriate. And this is the best way to ensure that we accurately capture your address, including the city and the state. And again, we are protecting your privacy. We're not sharing this, and we only use it for analysis purposes. The next step is to provide a label, which is used in that pop-up that I saw. So we're going to put the Field Museum, and then you can also provide a short description of your site. And you're going to click the next button. If there's any required fields that you didn't fill in, it will highlight for you. And the required fields are denoted by a red asterisk. So the next step is to fill out some information that is used for the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project that Erica mentioned. So we ask if your site is privately owned or is publicly accessible, such as a community garden. We also ask what is found within your site, and you can check all that apply, as well as what is found along the border of your site. And again, check all that apply. And then we ask about the different garden maintenance that you do at your site. The next step is to tell us how many patches you're planning to monitor. So let's say I have 2 patches, I will enter 2, and then I will get a section for each of those 2 patches to fill out. So for the first patch, I'm going to give it a unique name so that when I go back to monitor it every week, I know that this is that patch. So I'm going to call it my Northwest Statue patch. Just make sure that it is something that will help you identify it. We then want to know if you previously monitored it in a former year. So you can select all the years that apply, or you can let us know that this is a new patch that you are monitoring. And then we ask if more than 50% of your plants are in pots or containers. We are really interested to know about how well cities, and especially balconies and milkweed in pots do. So this is an area of interest of ours. And we also want to know when your milkweed was planted. The next step is to tell us about the number of species that are in your patch. As Erica mentioned, we do record the data by species, so this is really important. And if this number changes throughout because you plant, you can adjust this number. So let's say I have 2 species of milkweed currently in my patch. For each species, I'm going to identify the species name. So let's say the first species is butterfly milkweed. I'm going to enter in the number of plants, and if I happen to record it, the day that my milkweed first emerged. I have 2 species of milkweed, so for my second species, I will identify it as swamp or rose milkweed. I'll again note how many plants there were, as well as if I recorded the date that it emerged. And then for this patch, if you would like, you can submit a photo. We're going to encourage you to submit photos because we love seeing them, and we'll add them to our photo albums, and we love sharing them out as well. And this gives us a good idea of what the different types of patches look like in people's gardens throughout Chicago. So I did note that I do have 2 patches. So I'm going to go ahead and fill out the section for my second patch. This one is my Northeast patch by the path. It wasn't previously monitored. Again, we can say 50% or more are in pots or containers, when it was first planted, also how many species it had. Let's say this one only has one species of milkweed, as well as the number of plants that I initially count. And once again, you're given the option to submit a photo for that patch. I mentioned before that you can translate the survey into Spanish if you like, and that's by clicking on the button up top and just switching the language here. So I filled out the survey. The next step is just to hit that submit button. And once you do that, you're going to get an email that's going to look something like this. It's going to provide a short summary of your site, including the address of your site, as well as a description of each of your patches and your link for monitoring it. So let's go ahead and monitor that Northwest Statue patch. I'm going to click on my weekly survey link. Again, it will prompt you to log in if you're not already signed in. Here we can see that it remembers the name of my patch. And then it's going to ask me about the day that I monitored. Let's say I monitored this morning. I can enter in the date. I can enter in the time. This that you started. We'll enter in the stop time towards the end. And it already remembers the number of species, the species names, and the number of plants that I counted the last time I entered it, which was on the site survey. Again, if this information changes, please just go ahead and update it here. I'll show you what that looks like here, and we can reflect that in the survey as you're entering it. So let's say that there were some new plants. I can go ahead and also update my number of plants. And then we're going to ask about the general health of your milkweed. Please use your best judgment. We give you some examples of what that might look like, but this is just so we have an idea of how your milkweed is doing. And then if you saw any eggs, you're going to say that yes, you saw eggs. And again, we have some resources to help you identify them if you'd like. And if you've said yes, please enter how many you've seen. And similarly, if you've seen caterpillars, you'll say yes. And then you'll enter in the number by the stage of caterpillar. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but you can also use the links here as a reference. So let's say I saw 2 second instar caterpillars. I'll enter that number here and leave the rest as the default 0. I didn't see any pupae or chrysalises. We always were surprised when we saw them. The last 2 years, about 14 or 15 have been seen. So if you do see it, please let us know. And we love seeing those photos as well. Again, this patch has 2 species. So I just filled out all of that information on my butterfly milkweed. Actually, I've updated it to 3. So my second one was swamp milkweed. It has 14 plants. We'll leave that as is. The health, let's say, is fair. This time I didn't count any eggs or caterpillars, so I'll say no. And because I've added that 3rd milkweed species, I now have the option to enter in a new species that say I just added 2 new plants. I can do that right here. And then again, I'll fill out the same section as I did before. Let's say this milkweed is in poor health. Again, no eggs or caterpillars. And then you'll hit that next button. So the next section is all about monarch rearing and the July measurements. As Erica mentioned, we really prefer that you do not collect from the patch that you are monitoring. So preferably this will stay no, but per the protocol that we are following, if you do collect from the patch that you are monitoring, please say yes and let us know which type you have collected. Also, as Erica mentioned, for one time in July, so just 1 week, for each patch, please change this default no to a yes. And this is when you're going to tell us about where your milkweed is in your patch, whether it's just a patch of milkweed, whether it's on the outside, inside, or all mixed in. And also you're going to provide us with the measurements. You're going to do this by clicking on the shape of your patch and then providing the associated dimensions in inches. So if you select square, you're just going to enter one side. If you select rectangle, it'll give us 2 sides. So if I do this, I can say I have 12 inch on one side, 8 inch on the next, and then I'll select next. And then next we are on to the observations. Again, this is an optional section, but this is where even if you didn't see any eggs or caterpillars, you can tell us about the other things that you saw. So if you saw any adult monarchs while you were monitoring, you can select yes and tell us how many. And you can also check all of the other insects and spiders that you observed. Again, we have a number of guides here, including that new field guide I mentioned on the link. We also have those photos that you can look at, as well as a link to iNaturalist, where you can also submit your photo for identification. The next step is to tell us about the other plants that are in bloom. You can do this by either clicking on the arrow to go through the drop-down list, or you can actually start to type it out in the text box, and it will pre-select the options that are available. So I've added basil. We can see I have one plant. I'm going to add a second plant, so I'm going to click on the plus button. And again, I will choose from this list, and I'll see those options down below. If I need to, I can go back, click on one of those, and either edit it here, or I can use the trash can icon to delete it. So that lets you change it if you need to. And you can also use this text box down below to manually type it in. Just make sure to use a comma to separate each type. Again, we're looking for types of plants, not numbers. So just make sure to spell that out here. Here is when you can type in the time that you stopped monitoring, if you recorded that. And then the last page is for the photo and story. Again, this is one of our favorite parts of this project, is seeing everybody's stories and photos that come in. We love sharing the photos, especially during these presentations and during the final presentation we'll do at the end of the season. We also share them during the newsletters, which we'll talk about in a little moment. So please share any stories about what you observed, what you enjoyed about your monitoring, and any photos as well. So once you're done, you've submitted your weekly survey for this patch. You're going to hit that submit button, and then you're going to get an email that's going to be a summary of what you observed. It's going to have that date you observed. You'll see it also in the heading of that email. You'll also have the total number of plants you counted, what you saw in terms of eggs and caterpillars, as well as your plants in bloom. You'll also have a link if you need to edit that survey. You can click on it here. So that will open up the survey we just completed. You can make any changes you need to, and then just make sure to hit that submit button again. And you'll get a new email with the updates. And then you can also click on this link here to take a look at all of the weekly data that you previously submitted for that patch. So it's new, something we've added this year to allow people to kind of keep track of what data they've submitted. And then, as I mentioned, you're going to get a new link to monitor your weekly patch for the following week. If you happen to misplace this email, don't worry. You're also going to get a reminder email 6 days later, which will also have this link, as well as a link to review all of your data. And that was one of the new additions as well, as requested by our participants from last year. So now I'm going to turn it back to Erica, who's going to do a live demonstration to show you how you're going to monitor your plants.
Astute observers may note this is not a milkweed plant, because I have not picked up any milkweed yet. It is a mint plant that really needs to get planted. This is its last debut. It is infested with aphids. And so when you monitor, especially now in the season, I think most people start at the top of the plant and work down. As it gets later in the season, sometimes you start at the bottom and work your way up. But with young plants, you can almost grab the stem and kind of look up the plant and check the bottoms of all the leaves, because you do want to check the top, the bottom of the leaf. If the leaf sticks out from the stem on this little bit here, which is technically called a petiole, typically eggs are on the underside of the leaf. It's commonly said along the main leaf vein, but you really can't find them anywhere on the leaf. As it gets later in the season and the plant starts to form like a flower bud, tucked into that flower bud, you can also often find leaves. And it can take a little bit, especially at first, to develop a system for checking all the leaves, but it goes pretty quick once you get used to it and once you start to know what you're looking for. So in this plant, I would check this one. I would call this a separate plant because there's dirt separating them. And then I would check this and record the number of eggs and or caterpillars I found per plant. So there's another video of me doing this on the website with an actual milkweed plant, if that's helpful. And with that, should we jump into, so eggs and not eggs, especially at this point in the season, I have forgotten what eggs looked like last year, so I can't remember. And there are eggs out there. Lily found eggs in the garden at the Field Museum, but they're less common than they will be in July. So you're going to be searching a bit probably to find your first egg. You're going to be seeing a lot of what's in that right-hand photo there. which is the sap from the milkweed plant. It makes this latexy sap. Anytime the plant is even slightly damaged, it makes this sticky sap to discourage whatever damaged it, and it forms these little droplets or bubbles. They are more rounded than the eggs. The eggs are like come out and are pointy, football shaped on the end, and the eggs have these little striations on them. Color wise, they can be pretty close. It can help to zoom in. These were obviously zoomed in photos with somebody's phone. So you can use your phone to zoom in. If you have a magnifying lens or a hand lens, that can help you magnify that egg and be more sure that it's an egg. If we go to the next slide, the caterpillars. So from egg, you get caterpillar. There are 5 instars or stages of caterpillars. And we do ask you what stage the caterpillar you found is. And we have this slide available on our website for a little quickie guide. The first instar is the easiest to distinguish from everything else. It's also could be the hardest to find. Almost the eggs are sometimes easier to find because it's like smaller than your pinky nail. It's very light green, so it blends in with the leaves. And it doesn't have any of these things which look like antennae, but are actually tentacles that we're going to talk about for the identification. So it doesn't have the stripes, which is really the biggest indicator. So most people don't get the first instar confused with anything else. The second instar, they can grow a lot. So they can grow a lot in all the stages, really. So size is not a great indicator. But the second instar, those tentacles are really just starting to come out on the front, and they're just bumps on the back. And that is the strongest indicator for the second instar. The size of those tentacles and really the lack of the back tentacles. The third instar, which is probably the easiest one to confuse with other things, is the tentacles are longer. They're starting to extend almost to the face, but not past the face of the caterpillar. And now they have back tentacles. And this can be a little tricky because you usually only have one caterpillar. It seems easier when you can compare them all to each other. There are other indicators like these little forelegs at the front start moving further to the head as they go through the stages, and the black bands get darker and more distinct. I think those can be a little tough to find, especially because you don't often have a perfect side view of the caterpillar. But those are helpful, especially if you're not sure and you're having to decide. The fourth instar, firstly, is a good bit bigger than the second instar. They start feeding differently as well during this stage. Rather than eating holes in the leaves, they start just sawing sections of the leaf off, and they're really like mowing through your milkweed at this point. At this point, the tentacles in the front extend past the face, and the back tentacles are extending to the back of the caterpillar. Sometimes they have them kind of curled up, but they will be fairly long by the fourth instar. There's also a distinctive dot that can be found on the forelegs that I think can be hard to find, but some people find it really helpful. And those forelegs are moving closer to the head. Fifth instar, you have a very large caterpillar now. This typically does not come as a surprise. You've been watching this probably for a while by the time, in my case, rooting for it. By the time they get to the fifth instar, it has properly decimated your milkweed, and those tentacles are twice as long as the fourth instar. They really go past the face. They're definitely curling. It has really long back tentacles, and those black bands are almost velvety by the time they get to the fifth instar. So we'll do a little game here called Identify Guess the Caterpillar Stage. So it's coming up as a poll, and you're just going to guess the instar stage of this little caterpillar here. And I will share the result once a fair number of people have gotten to vote. I get asked, the black dots are in fact its poop. And especially if it's not a milkweed that I'm monitoring, it's often the poop that tells me that there is a caterpillar. So a lot of people have voted. I guess people are still voting. I'll give a few more folks a chance to vote. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Most people get a second instar, which I think is correct. The angle is a little tough, which is common. They're not often exactly the right angle for us to see. I see that it has front tentacles, but not really back tentacles, which is the second instar category. It's not the first because it doesn't have, because it's got the bands, and it's not the third because it doesn't really have back tentacles, but it is hard to see from this angle. So we're going to guess the instar stage for this caterpillar, which I think is properly shot at a weird angle, which is how we often see them. It is almost all of these are pictures taken from the race garden at the Field Museum, or people who do the project. So a lot of people have voted, so I'm going to end the poll and show the results. So most people guessed third instar, which I think is correct. It has those front tentacles that extend to the face, and it has some back tentacles, so it's not that second instar, but nothing is long enough to make me guess that we're in the fourth instar. And this last one tends to be our biggest unity here on this caterpillar. So this is our last vote here. And as I said, if this is seeming hard or confusing, please know that same slide that I shared is available on our website. Please also just make your best guess. If it seems like you're not sure, do just, you're probably close. So I'm going to end, and we're going to share the results. Most people said fifth instar, which I think is correct. It's really long front tentacles. That banding is very dark and vivid, and probably would be velvety if the photo is in better focus. And it is just decimating that milkweed. So with that, we will talk a little bit about the milkweed. We're nearing the end here. It's tough because a lot of the plant identification guides show you a beautiful, mature, fully flowering milkweed plant. And if you plant one, especially this time of year, they look small and green, like so many things in our garden. And sometimes don't even flower that first year. A lot of native plants don't flower the first year they're planted. So some common things just to help you identify it. You can always send us a photo if you're not sure. Common milkweed, which is still most of our observations come from people's common milkweed. At this point in the season, and I'll show some photos in a second of what it's looking like right now, it's coming up. It is, it's fuzzy, and that really distinguishes it from some things that you could confuse it with at this point in the year. Dogbane is one of those. The entire edge of the leaf is smooth. It's not serrated in any way, which distinguishes it from some non-milkweed things. Most of the milkweeds will give you some milky sap if you tear the leaf. Sometimes early in the season, there's not as much. Some species don't do it as much, but that's milkweed name. Swamp milkweed also goes by the name rose milkweed. That is one of the species that we give away. It's probably the second most common in the project. At this point in the year, the leaves are new and shiny. Its stem is darker, which can distinguish it from a lot of other things. More pointed than common milkweed and not as fuzzy. But that darker stem distinguishes it from a lot of other things that are coming up right now. I kind of think it's the trickiest early in the season. Butterfly milkweed is coming up now. For me, and I'll show you a photo, the leaves are still tucked in next to the stem. They haven't folded out yet. It tends to be, I'm nearer the lake, so it's a little colder at my site. It is hairy and fuzzy, which really distinguishes it from a lot of other things with the same sort of narrow leaf. And this is the one that loves sandy soil. And world milkweed right now, it just looks like a bunch of little green things. It is really tough to distinguish. It does have a stalk usually with leaves a row around it, which distinguishes it from a lot of things. Mine tends to be really small still at this point in the year and pretty hard to pick out. So if we look at a photo, this is just stuff that folks have sent us from around the area, what their common milkweed. This is common milkweed is a little ahead of mine. That butterfly milkweed is mine, so that's how it looks in my yard. My swamp milkweed, which is just being decimated by the neighborhood rabbits, Still hasn't extended its leaves out. Again, it's a little cooler here. I think further from the lake, that probably has already happened other places. So as I said, monarchs are here. Almost half of you all have seen one. Everyone else, that's your Memorial Day activity. Go find a monarch butterfly. So that means that you can start monitoring now. You can do your site survey now. Typically, we say start the first week of June. I think a handful of people have already started. Know that you're probably going to be giving us some zeros still in these early weeks, especially since it's not going to warm up until later over the holiday weekend. Monarchs are insects, they are responsive to temperature, but again, we appreciate those zeros. Seeing that nice steady rise in eggs as more and more people are seeing them is comfortingly accurate to the situation that's happening. We appreciate knowing, that helps us think about weather, but also like what is blooming and maybe getting monarchs to move and choose different sites. So we deeply appreciate that data. We also appreciate you continuing to send data if you take a couple weeks off to travel. July is when things really heat up. Probably go to the next slide. So what's next? As Karen said, we have one more training workshop. Clearly, I forgot to update the slide. It's June 8th. It's during the day, so you can join us for lunch. As we have said, one of these, the best training where I say the fewest times, will get posted on our website. And so for folks who couldn't have made it to any of these, and a few people have emailed me, but if you have folks that you could share that with, we really appreciate it. Honestly, some of the best recruitment we get is from you all. Our network only extends so far. If you've joined us today and you haven't registered on bit.ly/monarch monitors, maybe if you're not sure if you want to do the project, not sure if you want to sign up for another email list, I would encourage you to. We will have a newsletter. Lily is going to run that newsletter coming up soon, and it's going to feature photos and stories from you all, which really is our favorite part. We think it's people's favorite part and why they continue to open emails from us. And yeah, please do that site survey. So free milkweed. So if you've hung on just to find out about free milkweed, thank you. If you've hung on this far, you have earned milkweed by making it through our training. We do this because we know that it can be hard to find milkweed for sale. It feels like it's a little more available every year, but still, if you've missed your local native plant sale, a lot of nurseries sell out or don't have a lot or charge quite a bit for it sometimes. And so we have these free plant giveaways. It's 2 or 3 milkweeds. They are seedlings. They're grown by us, so they're not huge. Often there is more than one plant in each little pod, to be honest. So if you're very patient, you can separate them and have more than 2 plants. And those will be Saturday, June 4th in the afternoon out at Skokie Lagoons, which, confusing to me, is in Glencoe. If you've been with us before, we are normally in Edgebrook, but we couldn't get that site this year. Thursday evening, after work, I think 6 to 8, we'll be at Our Lady of the Snows, which is near Midway. And Saturday, June 11th, as part of the Beaubien Woods Celebration Day, we'll be at Beaubien Woods, which is on the far south side of Chicago. So we do really ask you to RSVP at bit.ly/free milkweed 2022 because we need to know how many plants to bring and know how many people are coming. We actually don't mind if you don't RSVP for this, but that's really important. And this year, as in past years, we are giving away signs for project participants. This year, unlike past years, we actually have plenty of signs, so I'm not too worried about us running out. We only have a few in Spanish, but we have a lot in English. They have 2 sides, so you can sort of choose which one you want to display or do it sideways like I do so people can read both sides. And that's just to acknowledge, you don't have to do it, but that's just to acknowledge that is what's happening with this garden. It's a little bit of advertising for the project, and I hope a little bit of bragging for you all for planting milkweed and caring for monarchs. And with that, we move into the question zone. So while people are thinking, I'm going to look in the chat, see what's here. So somebody did ask in the chat, and I answered it, but I want to say it out loud for everyone that if your milkweed is in containers or containers is the only space you have or the space that you want to plant, we love container data. Somebody did a monitored a rooftop garden for us last year, and they had so many caterpillars. I think there is some old information out there that native plants, or milkweed in particular, doesn't do well in a pot. And I had a swamp milkweed pretty happily growing in like a 18-inch deep pot on a very windy balcony for many years. Sometimes they don't overwinter as well as milkweed that's grown in the ground. It can be helpful to kind of move those pots to the south side of your house, protect them as best you can, group them together. But we've had a lot of success. Monarchs don't seem to mind. We've had plenty of monarch success with milkweed in pots. I am not aware of a swallowtail program. That doesn't mean there isn't one out there. I know there's a very active Facebook community of people rearing swallowtails. I have reared swallowtails with my kiddo. Sorry, I did not read the question. Somebody was asking about a group or data for folks rearing swallowtail butterflies. And their host plant is plants in the carrot family. So that includes parsley, dill, fennel. In the native plant world, I have golden Alexander, which they seem to like a little less, but tolerate if I do not have any dill or parsley planted. So I know some folks I mentioned milkweed, additional milkweed sales. The Illinois Native Plant Society lists on their website the remaining milkweed plant sales. So if you can't make it to ours, or you want to get more plants or different plants, that is a great spot to go look. As I said, there are more of them than there used to be. Anything else? Anyone want to unmute and ask a question? Yeah, somebody says swallowtails love fennel. They really do. And I like fennel now. That was not a part of something I ate recently.
One question that came through was how deep should the pot be? And someone actually messaged me as well, mentioning that milkweed can have, deep roots. So is that something they need to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one I was using was like more than 12, but probably not all of 18 inches deep. I think a deeper pot, I mean, I try a 12. I haven't tried a 12. It might work. The problem with the overwintering is really, I think, protection from that freeze-thaw cycle, or that's what people have theorized. And so I think, I'm not sure that a deeper pot will help you more successfully overwinter it. I would guess you might need 12 inches. You're going to have to water it somewhat frequently. I mean, that's always a challenge with things in pots, is drying out. But I think I have certainly had success with swamp milkweed. I know some people have had success with butterfly milkweed. It likes a drier, sandier soil, and that might in some ways make it happier in a pot. It's just going to eat up heat. It loves heat. That's not as many people plant world milkweed is my experience. We don't have as many people in the project doing it, so I don't know about its success. And somebody had sent us a photo of themselves. That's true. They had a common milkweed growing, and that plant really looked like, or that pot looked like it was only 12 inches deep. And that plant was like 5 feet tall. It was taller than the guy in the photo. That was pretty cool. Prairie milkweed, I can't, well, let me say this. I have not been that successful at growing it. Plenty of people are, but I was just looking at some very Midland unhappy prairie milkweed in my yard. It's growing all around the rice garden in the field museum. I think it likes like a little more clay than maybe I have. I think it also is one that maybe likes a little more moisture than I have. I have a pretty dry, sandy situation. So that's my guess. Please feel free to, Lily's saying, please feel free to email us at monarchs@fieldmuseum.org with questions. Know that this is the whole team, so if we don't get back to you right away, it is because it's just really the three of us. But we're excited to
Someone did,
yeah.
Sorry, Erica.
No, go.
Someone did ask about spacing milkweed plants, like how far apart they should be.
Yeah. so this is one of the reasons we ask you how big your garden is, because there was a theory that the how close they were together might matter. So far in our data, it doesn't seem to matter. I don't know what the official ruling there is. I would say, you could give them like 1 foot spacing, especially common milkweed is going to spread. That's the biggest milkweed planting tip is if you have common milkweed, it is going to spread underground and it can be a little pushy and take over. So you want to have it in a space you're either okay with that and when it's doing that, they'll grow very close together. So either a space where you're okay with that happening. Some people do thin common milkweed in the spring. Some people will cut, half of the stems. That can also just be a native plant trick in general. If you don't want them to get super tall and flop over, you can trim them at this point in the season. I have rabbits that do that for me, so I don't have to do that. But especially if you have asters that tend to flop over, that's a great trick. For the other species, they're a little less pushy. Some people have said they had that problem with swamp milkweed spreading. It's not that happy for me, so it doesn't do that. And mine are actually quite close together. They're probably 4 or 5 inches apart. But giving them a little more space, they will get big, but often not that first year. That first year they're putting a lot of energy into their underground root structure, and they'll really grow that second year. So I want to tell, this is sort of concludes the formal program. People should feel free to leave. People can hang out if they want to ask an additional question. Thank you so much. I actually see names in here of people who I owe an email response to. This tends to become a pretty busy point in the season for us. Thank you for joining us.